So, as you heard from the introduction, I do a lot in health, and I think like digital technology is really going to revolutionize healthcare in the next 30 to 50 years. So I would like just give you a very short flavor, and then you can come to for more details afterwards in the coffee break. If you look at what happens in a chronic health condition, and I really have here basically a timeline, and basically the severity of any disease, any chronic disorder. So in the beginning, you're doing pretty well. At a certain moment, there might be something happening to you. And at a certain moment, you get into your first severe episode. This can be anything. I'm particularly interested in mental disorders, psychiatry disorders, neurological disorders. And what happens if you get here, your psychiatrist will ask you, how do you feel today? And maybe you can answer this, but the second question will be, how did you feel last week? How did you feel last month? And then you start already thinking, and it's like really hard to know how you were feeling here or what's really happening here, because you're going to be biased by what's happening here. The definition of a chronic disorder is also that maybe you get some medication, maybe you get some treatment, you go back to a fairly healthy condition, but at a certain moment you get a second exacerbation or inflammation. So the question is, can we use digital technology to collect objective data from people rather than asking how do you feel? Can we get data that we can collect during the periods where you're relatively stable in order to inform or predict when you go off? And so this is a use of digital technology. And then there is a second thing, that if you give a drug to a neurological or a psychiatric patient, you have no way to validate if the drug works. You can ask again, how do you feel today? How do you feel tomorrow? And so on and so forth. But it's really hard, so we try to get digital technology to basically quantify the effect of therapeutics, drugs, interventions, and so on in an objective way in order to also then give objective feedback rather than very subjective feedback, which causes huge trial costs. I show here a pill box, but also some interventions might be digital. You can have an app that says, why don't you go for a walk rather than staying the whole day at home, and so on and so forth. So again, it's very easy to create an app. It's very hard to create an app that is validated and that basically has healthcare benefits. And then if you think about digital technology, there is an explosion of wearables and gadgets that you can buy. These are all consumer products. They all have different flavors. They all measure something, most of the time not really validated. And the question is then, for us, how can we use these low-cost gadgets and turn them into healthcare monitoring devices? One particular example that I would like to highlight, because I'm interested in it, is the circadian rhythms. Maybe not so familiar for you, but circadian rhythms is the way we align with day and night because of the rotation around the sun. And basically every cell in our body has such an oscillation. In the morning we prepare for the day, we get more energy, and in the evening we wind down. One way to reflect is basically looking at activity and sleep, but as I will show later on, there is a number, like basically everything in our body has this oscillation. Why is this relevant? Like as long as there was no light, people were naturally aligned to day and night. And around 1900, we got like the invention of a light bulb. A bit later, we got an explosion of technology that basically caused the disruption of circadian rhythms. We have 24/7 access to unhealthy food. We fly around the world. We're playing on smartphones and laptops before we go to bed, which disrupts our natural rhythm. You might think, okay, who cares? Actually, in parallel to this, there is also a very similar rise in antidepressants. So people get depressed because of this disruption. People get obese. People get diabetes. And just, if you don't believe me, just take a mouse and put him on an artificial jet lag. So just change his random light and dark cycles randomly. Give him the same food, everything the same. He gets fat, he gets diabetes, and he gets kind of depressed. So basically, we really believe that this is the cause of a lot of health problems, and so we want to think how can we measure how can we measure and then cure circadian rhythms. You might think what we currently do is basically we try to wake up in the morning with an alarm. We get some stimulants. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And then in the evening, you try to create your artificial rhythm back. And then the next day, we start from the beginning again, right? So can we, basically, it's not very professional as a therapy, and it's neither how do you measure then if you're doing well and if this somehow helps you rather than feeling good. So what we try to do is in a large study, which we call like AMOS, Automated Monitoring of Symptom Severity, we try to put a lot of digital technology in people. So we exploit the fact that everyone has a smartphone, that we can ask questions, that we can track light levels, that we can track activity levels. We enhance this with some gadgets. These are activity and sleep trackers. These are heart rate patches, because again, heart rates will have reflection of the circadian rhythm, and then try to see, can we, first of all, can we get the data? Can we get all the technology up and running? But then also, can we use some smart machine learning in order to extract relevant information? And the answer is obviously yes. So this is, for example, what you see here in red and yellow are bipolar patients. So these are patients that are sometimes depressed and sometimes they're fine, but it's a chronic condition, so they're doomed to relapse. And this is a number of features that we extract from their GPS patterns. So we passively collect where they are. We're obviously anonymizing for security reasons, but then you see that basically when they're good, they look like healthy volunteers, and when they're in depressed weeks, their patterns on like abstract levels are completely different. So again, we have a passive marker of disease severity that we can use for monitoring, and basically lots of it is based on their regularity. Do they go to work on a daily basis? Are they fairly irregular? The second thing is, I know everybody brags that they don't need much sleep and that you can go out late and have lots of fun. This is basically the correlation between your regularity, as we quantify it in circadian rhythms, in 4 days, correlated to the variation in sadness. So we're able to communicate with these people, and we ask them several times a day, how do you feel? And you randomly, you all know some likes, and like you can rate from 1 to 7. If you just look at the variability, how often you fluctuate in these 4 days, and you look at the fluctuation between how regular you go to bed, it's a very strong correlation. So just, if you remember one thing from my talk, try to care about your circadian rhythms. And just the last thing, like in a different application where we also are working, this is basically driven by Apple. So basically, Apple launched ResearchKit, which is like a smartphone app, and because Apple does it, everybody wants to use it, and suddenly, rather than we doing as a university a study with like 100 or 150 subjects, which is for us already a large number, they basically reach like 6,000 to 7,000 subjects, where we can ask them to do a test and really understand human behavior. So what we do here in the Parkinson's study is we can ask memory tests, we can do a finger tapping test, because people with Parkinson's, they have like what they call tremor, there are voice features that might be impaired in Parkinson. And we can collect a lot of data on these people and again apply machine learning. And obviously, as you might know, machine learning just becomes much better when you have a lot of data rather than having a few samples. And what it gives us, if you do a typical research study, this is basically the finger tapping reaction of healthy volunteers. Here you have in blue from Parkinson patients, and you're very lucky if in a normal study you have like 30 measurements, repetitions, because you have to ask them in, you have to control how they do the experiment. With Apple launching all this technology, we can look at long-term patterns, and then you see even that Parkinson patients basically can learn to do finger tapping better. And again, it's like, gives you totally different information, and you have to think about how you analyze your data and how you extract relevant information. And basically, this is the last slide I have. You can imagine whatever test they do on paper and basically ask you to draw the spiral. Obviously, as a neurologist, you can look and say, okay, probably this patient is better than this patient. But if you have it digitized, you can also quantify efficacy and so on, and basically quantify then the drug efficacy, what we are doing for different drugs. So just to conclude, I think digital health is a very exciting opportunity. It gives you a lot of opportunities to basically explore data on patients that wasn't possible in the past. And in parallel, you also have to develop new analysis strategies to deal with this increased complexity. Thank you very much to all the people in the group.